There is a tweet that we've probably shared on this show more than any single tweet ever. It's because it terrifies me to the core. And I think it should terrify every single Washingtonian, every single freedom-loving person, every single person who believes that the power is inherent in the people and the government is supposed to work for us. And that is the tweet from the chair of the Washington State Democratic Party, Shasti Conrad, where she shared her dream, her vision for what she wanted to do with the state of Washington if Democrats achieve supermajorities. I'll just remind you of the tweet. With supermajorities, we can clean up the Constitution. My goal for 2026 sends a shiver down my spine. And the truth is, as some have pointed out, that goal might not even take until 2026. It's very possible if Republicans don't have a good year, if voters don't see the disaster and the danger of one-party rule, that they could reach supermajorities or certainly strengthen their existing majorities here in November of 2024. Now, I have shown that tweet a lot because I think about what they'll do, right? What are you going to clean up from the state constitution? And certainly you look at bills that they've been this close to passing in Olympia, and you just know that if there's no resistance, they're just going to push those things through. I mean, the sky is truly the limit. Rent control that they couldn't pass this year, that's a done deal if they strengthen their majorities. Pay for striking workers, that's a done deal if they strengthen their majorities. Pushing through an unconstitutional tax on your income, despite all the protections in place against it, they might just think that they can get away with it with supermajorities. The other thing you can be rest assured that they will try to do is further erode your Second Amendment rights. Now, I have said of the Second Amendment, it's not an amendment that I use on a regular basis, if ever, but I make my living off the First Amendment, and a government that would erode protections in other amendments is a government that would erode the protections that I enjoy from our Constitution. So I'll fight for the Second Amendment just as hard as I'd fight for the First Amendment. And I think everyone who values the Constitution should do the same. Now, if you want to change the Second Amendment, fine. There is a reason our founding fathers built in a process to change the amendments, to add amendments, to get rid of amendments. And if Americans on the whole really want to go ahead and change the Second Amendment or abolish it or put something different on the books, they can do that. It's difficult. It takes a lot of consensus, but they can do it. And if that's what they choose to do, who am I to say that that's the wrong thing if it's the consensus of the majority of Americans in states? So I really think that if we have strengthened Democratic majorities, they're going to really try to push the limit on eroding your Second Amendment rights. And it's not just me that thinks that. They're saying it behind the scenes. So there was a really good public records request and some documents obtained by a guy named Michael Easton. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael Easton Law. He's basically a citizen sleuth, and he does a lot of good public records requests. So he put in a request. This was quite the doozy of a request, and he's getting the records back slowly, as you can imagine, because the request that he put in, he filed it, I think, in earlier this year. So it wasn't that long ago, but he's still waiting for all the installments. He asked for all Microsoft Teams communications for all Democrat members of the Senate dating from January 1st, 2019 to March 11th, 2024. That is a hell of a public records request. I complain sometimes that they take too long. It's because my requests are narrow in scope. Like if this one took a year or so, I'd be like, that's understandable. So he wasn't even about anything specific. Give me all the Teams messages sent back and forth between Democratic members of the Washington State Senate in that 5-year time frame. And again, all the credit in the world to Michael Easton. I highly recommend that you follow his Twitter account because he does not only public records requests, but he posts all the information publicly. So you can click on the link. You can see all the raw data for yourself. He's doing a good one right now on State Senator Mark Elias and all his travel spending and adding all that up. So if you're just a huge nerd for government accountability, it's a good Twitter account to follow. So these records start coming out, and he's only gotten the tip of the iceberg for these records he requested, as you can imagine. He's got records back for Teams messages that originate from just a couple Democratic state senators. But even those messages, when lawmakers believe that they can just chat in Teams back and forth amongst each other, even those are very telling about their priorities and about some of what their goals are in eroding the Second Amendment, but also the lack of knowledge they have about gun laws. Here they are really nonstop for the last 10 years trying to erode Second Amendment rights. And it's shocking to me the lack of basic knowledge they have about gun rights. I'll give you an example. This is a Teams message from Senator Andy Billig, who, announced his retirement this past year, but he was the Senate Majority Leader, one of the most powerful Democrats in Olympia. This is a Teams message he sent, and this is a chat amongst a lot of Democratic senators on June 16th, 2022. He said, so this is in the middle of the summer, right? They're talking about, hey, what are we going to introduce in the upcoming legislative session? And he tosses this out there. Is there discussion of a bill that would raise the age to buy a handgun to 21? Now, if you know anything about our gun rights, you know what's wrong with that. It already is 21. You already have to be 21 to purchase a handgun in Washington state. There are some slight exemptions to that at the federal level, but that is obviously a glaring issue that one of the most powerful Democrats in Olympia doesn't realize that, or didn't realize at the time, that the age to buy a handgun was already 21. Senator Christine Rolfes reminded him of that in the chat. Andy, I think the handgun age is 21 already. I think, I'm not sure, but I think maybe she was just trying to be nice. Hey, aren't you the majority leader? Why don't you know this when we're talking about gun laws? So that just gives you, I think, an understanding of how uninformed they are. And I'll be honest, back when I was covering just politics and crime and stuff as a mainstream journalist, there would be stories that would come up every now and again about gun laws. And I admittedly didn't know a lot about guns, when they talk about so-called assault rifles or semi-automatic assault rifles. And what would I do? Well, I'd pick up the phone and I'd ask someone who knew something about guns to explain it to me like I was 5 years old. And I had no shame in that, because I don't want to get on TV and sound like a moron talking about guns. And you're telling me that Senator Andy Billig couldn't do the same? Hey, as we're considering gun control legislation, why don't I ask some very basic questions or gain some very basic knowledge about what gun rights and gun laws there already are? So then things get, I think, a little more nefarious and unhinged, where you see the true disdain they have for guns in general and for the Second Amendment protections. This is a message from Senator Annette Cleveland to the group. Studies have shown that merely seeing a gun can increase aggression. From February 26, 2021, so they're in the middle of the legislative session. There are some conversations happening behind the scenes about open carry, and she says studies have shown that merely seeing a gun can increase aggression. Nicole, when you see a gun, does it increase your aggression?
No.
Oh, interesting.
That's not how
wow, I don't
respond.
know. And before I get to, it's also funny, if you could put that back up, Senator Rebecca Saldana, her response was to Senator Annette Cleveland, I always love when you bring the data to back up the point. All she said is studies have shown. Where's the data there? I want to know more about this study. I want to know more about the data set. And if the simple act of seeing someone open carrying a gun increases your aggression, my thought is that you have probably some mental health issues. And maybe you're not someone who ought to have a firearm. It's just fascinating, this world they live in. So there's this interesting message. This, again, is February 26, 2021. As they're talking about, this is in the middle of a session, right? Senator Steve Hobbs, now the Secretary of State, who was in the Senate at the time, he pipes in to this chat about the gun bill they're discussing. He says, I hope this is the last gun bill for this session. And he was a very moderate Democrat at the time. I think he still is. He says, I'm getting swamped with emails from my constituents, angry with this bill and others. Please remember, we don't all live in dark blue districts. I have to explain myself on this vote, and it's not as easy as you might think. Instead of, understanding where he's coming from, hey, I get it, thanks for sharing that, we'll keep that in mind, Senator Marco Elias sends a snarky response in Teams, this is the first gun bill. As if, what do you mean no more gun bills this session? This is the first one that we're discussing. No care or concern for what Senator Hobbs is trying to say there, and look, this isn't popular everywhere. I have to answer to my constituents. Taking these votes is not as easy as you might think. Senator Elias, this is the first gun bill. Question mark too. How catty. He knows it's the first gun bill. He's like, this is the first gun bill. Just ridiculous. Now here is the one that I saw of all the ones I've reviewed thus far. And again, just the tip of the iceberg for this public records request that Michael Easton put in. And this is the one that directly speaks to me to the kinds of things that Democrats will attempt to do if they're able to strengthen their majorities and, God forbid, reach supermajorities. This is something thrown into a Teams chat so cavalierly, which is shocking when you consider its contents, by Senator Mona Doss. Again, all these are Democrats. Someone reached out to me to introduce a bill banning the sale of all firearm ammunition in Washington state. So she doesn't name who that person was, but someone reached out to her and said, hey, what about introducing a bill banning the sale of all firearm ammunition in Washington state? She goes on to write to her Democratic colleagues, he said, quote, by making ammo harder to get and more expensive, that can address the problem without directly raising Second Amendment questions. That shows the disdain they have for the Second Amendment. And it also proves something that we know to be true, which is a lot of the laws that they pass are designed to try to circumvent the Second Amendment, like a bill they passed this past legislative session that adds all these burdensome requirements onto gun shops to increase their security, to increase their video monitoring, to make it more laborious for their employees when it comes to taking guns out, putting guns in, how the guns need to be locked up, the material of their front doors, what's over their window, things that will put a lot of gun shops out of business, period. Because, for instance, they want them to have all these cameras set up in these specific locations in gun shops and then store all that data for a really long time. Well, storing that much video data costs a lot of money. So in that bill, no question, what they're trying to do is make it so expensive to run a lawful gun shop that there simply aren't gun shops around for people to legally purchase firearms. So that's the same sentiment here from Mona Doss, where she's saying, hey, somebody's asking me to introduce a bill to just ban the sale of all firearm ammunition. So basically your gun becomes a worthless hunk of metal. If you can't import the ammunition, you can't buy it locally, your gun is completely useless. But it also shows, again, the misunderstanding that she has. You can't, reasonable courts that care about the Constitution realize that you can't render an amendment to the Constitution useless by virtue of other policies that you pass. Our constitutional protections have to be meaningful. So this is something that, at least in a sane court of law, would absolutely never stand up, because it is something that renders the Second Amendment completely useless to a populace. So it just shows they don't really care that much for whether the bills or the laws or the proposals that they're pushing through are constitutional. Like, they'll do it anyway and just hope that they get some sort of good judge and a good court like the Washington State Supreme Court, and then the high court never takes it up. But, I wouldn't put this past them to try something like this. Again, you look at what they've done with gun shops already, which is blatantly just to try to get around the Second Amendment. They have a real misunderstanding of our constitutional protections and what's constitutional. Either a misunderstanding or they just don't care. I don't know which one it is. I think both. You look at Andy Billig saying, oh, why don't we introduce a bill, like, this is a great idea. Why don't we introduce a bill to ban the sale of handguns until you're 21? It's like no idea whatsoever. But this is just some of the things that they discuss behind the scenes. A small fraction of the records that Michael Easton has requested. And I certainly look forward to seeing what other sort of things were pushed behind the scenes, not only on the Second Amendment front, but also on crime, public safety. I imagine there was some really good Microsoft Teams chats on the whole debate over police pursuits that I very much look forward to seeing. But again, he pushed out this whole data dump on his Twitter account, so I recommend you go peruse it yourself. But on this issue, I thought I saw these and I'm like, we're long overdue to have some conversations about 2A issues in the state of Washington. So William Kirk, you might know him. He's a gun law expert. He's really big on YouTube as well, if you're interested. He is going to join us this week on Sundays with Subscribers to talk about some of the data in these public records, or some of the emails and messages in these public records requests, but also to talk about what he believes could happen in the state of Washington with 2A rights if Democrats reach a supermajority. And what do you see as being maybe next up for Democrats if they get him in the governor's office and strengthen their majorities?
Well, listen, all that Governor Inslee and Attorney General Ferguson have ever wanted to do with this state since they came into power is to make it more Californiized as much as possible. So one need only look as far as the state of California to see what other kind of ludicrous gun laws we have. The first one that they're going to go after, and a lot of people don't get too spun up about this, but this is a big deal, is they want to go ahead and alleviate state preemption laws. And while I know a lot of lawful and responsible gun owners in Washington State aren't real happy about the folks in Olympia making the gun laws, just think what happens when the Seattle City Council gets to start making their own gun laws. And what we'll end up with is this crazy tapestry of varying gun laws. And so as you travel from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, individuals can literally go from being lawful to unlawful to lawful to unlawful as they transcend across the state. And that is one of the really important reasons why we have state preemption laws, and the Democrats are hell bent on doing away with that. I think we'll see background checks on ammunition implemented. I think we'll probably see a banning on shipping or importing of ammunition that can only be purchased from an FFL, which will exponentially raise the cost for all lawful and responsible gun owners. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the things they'll try to do.
Yeah, and that's obviously very concerning. So William Kirk with Washington Gun Law is going to join us on Sundays with Subscribers. We're going to talk about some of the existing efforts to rein in 2A rights. We're going to talk about what could happen under a supermajority and also dig into some of this data from Michael Easton that's coming out in these public records requests. So if you'd like to become a subscriber to catch that interview, you can sign up undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com.